The gunshot pierced the still morning air, making Beatrice Turner flinch as she watched her father collapse to the ground, a crimson stain spreading across his chest. It was June 1875 in the harsh, unforgiving territory of Wyoming, and her life had just shattered before her eyes. Standing over her father's body was Harold Winters, the most powerful rancher in the county and the man who had been demanding Beatrice's hand in marriage for months. "Now, Miss Turner," Winters said, holstering his pistol with practiced ease, "I reckon we can proceed with our wedding arrangements without further resistance." Beatrice's throat closed with horror as she knelt beside her father's body. At 21, she had spent the last 3 years helping him build their modest homestead after her mother's passing. Now she was alone, with nothing but a small plot of land that Winters had been trying to add to his sprawling empire. "You murdered him," she whispered, her voice barely audible as tears streamed down her face. Winters smiled coldly. "Self-defense, my dear. Everyone in town will testify that your father drew first. After all, I own most of this county." He gestured to his men. "The ceremony will be tomorrow. Pack your things." Beatrice had no choice. With her father dead and Winters' influence extending to every corner of the county, including the sheriff's office, she found herself standing beside him the next day in the town church, speaking vows she didn't mean while her heart turned to stone. The following weeks were a blur of misery. Winters showed no interest in her beyond the possession of her father's land and the appearance of having a young, beautiful wife. He spent most nights at the saloon in town, returning home drunk and passing out before he could do more than bark orders at her. For this small mercy, Beatrice was grateful, but the cage of her new life felt no less confining. On a scorching July afternoon, Beatrice was tending to the small garden she had insisted on keeping when she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Looking up, she saw a lone rider coming down the long drive to the main house. It wasn't unusual for visitors to arrive at the Winters ranch, but something about this rider caught her attention. As he drew closer, she saw he was younger than most of Winters' associates, perhaps 25, with a lean, muscular build and an easy posture in the saddle that spoke of countless hours riding the range. Unlike her husband's flashy attire, this man wore practical clothing, faded denim, a simple shirt, and a well-worn hat that shaded his face from the relentless sun. When he dismounted, Beatrice noticed his eyes, first a clear, piercing blue that seemed to take in everything around him with quiet assessment. His face was tanned from the sun, with a strong jaw partially hidden beneath several days' worth of stubble. "Afternoon, madam," he said, removing his hat and revealing thick, dark hair. "Name's Isaac Adams. Mr. Winters hired me on as his new foreman." Beatrice nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. "My husband isn't here. He's in town on business." "That's all right. I was told to report to the ranch and get settled." His eyes lingered on her face, and she realized he was noticing the fading bruise on her cheek, a souvenir from the one time she had dared argue with Winters. She turned away quickly. "The bunkhouse is behind the barn. You can stable your horse there." "Thank you, Mrs. Winters." "Turner," she corrected automatically, then bit her lip. "I mean Winters." Isaac studied her for a moment longer, his expression unreadable. "Right. Well, I'll get out of your way." As he led his horse toward the barn, Beatrice watched him go, surprised by her slip. She had been careful to play the role of dutiful wife whenever anyone was around. Something about Isaac Adams had momentarily broken through her guard. Over the next few weeks, Beatrice found herself watching the new foreman from a distance. He worked harder than any of the other hands, rising before dawn and often not returning to the bunkhouse until well after sunset. Unlike her husband's other employees, who were mostly rough men chosen for their willingness to do Winters' dirty work, Isaac seemed to genuinely care about the ranch itself. One evening, when Winters was once again in town, Beatrice was startled by a knock at the kitchen door. Opening it, she found Isaac standing there, hat in hand. "Sorry to bother you, Mrs. Winters. I need the key to the storage shed. We're short on feed for the morning." "Of course." Beatrice retrieved the key from its hook. As she handed it to him, their fingers brushed, and she felt an unexpected jolt of awareness. "Thank you kindly." He hesitated, then added, "That's a mighty fine stew you're making. Smells better than anything we get in the bunkhouse." Beatrice smiled despite herself. Would you like some? There's more than enough. The offer surprised both of them. Isaac glanced toward the main part of the house. I wouldn't want to cause trouble. Mr. Winters won't be back tonight. She didn't explain how she knew this, how her husband had left with a particularly attractive saloon girl clinging to his arm. After a moment's hesitation, Isaac nodded. Then I'd be obliged. They ate in the kitchen, Beatrice sitting across from him at the worn wooden table where she usually took her solitary meals. At first, the conversation was stilted, but gradually, they began to talk more freely. Isaac told her about growing up on a small farm in Missouri, about losing his parents to fever when he was 18 and setting out west to find his own way. What about you? He asked. How did a lady like yourself end up here? Beatrice hesitated, then found herself telling him everything about her father's homestead, about Winter's threats, and finally, about the morning she had watched her father die. He gave me a choice between marrying him or watching our land get seized for taxes we couldn't possibly owe, she finished quietly. Then he made sure I had no choice at all. Isaac's expression had grown increasingly grim as she spoke. That's not a marriage, he said finally. That's imprisonment. It's the same thing for most women out here, Beatrice replied, surprised by her own candor. It shouldn't be. Isaac met her eyes directly. A real marriage is a partnership. It's built on respect, on caring for one another. I wouldn't know, Beatrice said softly. I've never seen such a thing. Isaac's gaze held hers. Then let me teach you what it means. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning. Beatrice felt her heart beating faster. Before she could respond, they heard the distant sound of hooves approaching. Winters returning unexpectedly. You should go, she said urgently, standing and gathering his plate. Isaac rose, his expression troubled. Beatrice, please. He can't find you here. With a reluctant nod, Isaac put his hat back on and slipped out the back door, disappearing into the darkness just as Winter's horse came to a stop in the front yard. The next morning, Beatrice was hanging laundry when she noticed Isaac mending a fence not far from the house. Though they didn't speak, she felt his eyes on her throughout the day. Each time she glanced in his direction, he would quickly return to his work, but the awareness between them was palpable. Days passed, and Beatrice found herself creating reasons to be outside when Isaac was working nearby. They rarely had the opportunity to speak alone, but sometimes he would tip his hat to her, or she would bring water to the men working in the fields and linger a moment longer by his side. One afternoon, Winters announced he would be traveling to Cheyenne for a week on business. As soon as his carriage disappeared down the road, Beatrice felt a weight lift from her shoulders. That evening, as she was closing up the chicken coop, she turned to find Isaac standing a few yards away. I thought you might like some company for supper, he said simply. They ate together again that night, and the next, gradually growing more comfortable in each other's presence. Isaac told her stories about his travels, making her laugh for the first time in months. Beatrice shared memories of her childhood, of her mother's cooking and her father's dreams of building something lasting. On the third night, after they had finished eating, Isaac asked her to show him her garden. In the soft twilight, they walked between the rows of vegetables and herbs. This is your doing, Isaac observed. Not his. Beatrice nodded. It's the one thing that's still mine. She hesitated, then added, sometimes I think about running away, just taking what I can carry and heading west. Why don't you? Where would I go? A woman alone. She shook her head. And he would find me. He's made that clear. Isaac stopped walking and turned to face her. You wouldn't have to be alone. Beatrice looked up at him, her heart in her throat. What are you saying, Isaac? I'm saying I can't stand seeing you trapped here. I'm saying. He took a deep breath. I'm falling in love with you, Beatrice Turner. Before she could respond, he reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His touch was gentle, nothing like Winter's rough handling. When his fingers traced the line of her jaw, she closed her eyes, leaning into his hand. This is dangerous, she whispered, even as she stepped closer to him. Some things are worth the risk. When his lips met hers, Beatrice felt something break open inside her, a dam holding back feelings she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge. The kiss deepened, and she wound her arms around his neck, pressing herself against him as if she could melt into his embrace. Eventually, they pulled apart, both breathing heavily. Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "Come with me," he said quietly. "We can leave tonight. Head for California. Start fresh where he can't reach us." Hope flared briefly in Beatrice's chest before reality doused it. "He has connections everywhere, and his men would hunt us down. Not if he can't follow." "What do you mean?" Isaac's expression grew serious. "There's something you should know. I didn't come here by accident. I've been tracking Winters for over a year." Beatrice stepped back, confusion clouding her features. "Tracking him? Why?" "Because 3 years ago, he and his men raided a homestead in Colorado. They killed the family living there, a man, his wife, and their 12-year-old son." Isaac's voice tightened with controlled emotion. "The man was my brother." Beatrice gasped. "Oh, Isaac. I'm so sorry. I've been gathering evidence, testimonies from people who've seen what he's done. There's a federal marshal in Laramie who's building a case against him. With what I've learned here, plus your testimony." Isaac took her hands in his. "We could end this, Beatrice. We could make sure he never hurts anyone else." The revelation stunned her. All this time, Isaac had been working against Winters. It explained his presence on the ranch, his careful observations of everything that happened. And yet, what she had seen in his eyes when he looked at her that hadn't been part of any plan. "You really think a marshal would take our word over his?" she asked skeptically. "Not just our word. I have documents, letters implicating him in land fraud, witness statements about other murders." Isaac squeezed her hands. "Your testimony about your father would be the final piece." Beatrice thought of her father, of how he had died protecting their land and her future. What would he want her to do now? "If we fail," she said slowly, "he'll kill us both. If we stay," Isaac countered, "you'll remain his prisoner, and eventually, he'll discover that I'm not who I claim to be. This might be our only chance." Under the vast Wyoming sky, with stars beginning to appear above them, Beatrice made her decision. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow night. Pack only what you need. We'll travel light and fast." They spent the next day making careful preparations. Isaac arranged for 2 of the most reliable horses to be saddled and ready, while Beatrice gathered provisions and the few keepsakes she couldn't bear to leave behind, including her mother's wedding ring and a small daguerreotype of her parents. As dusk fell, they met at the edge of the property. Isaac helped her mount, then swung up onto his own horse. "Ready?" he asked. Beatrice took one last look at the house that had been her prison for the past months. "Yes," she said firmly. "Let's go." They rode through the night, keeping to less traveled trails. Isaac knew the terrain well, leading them through winding passes and across shallow streams to obscure their trail. By dawn, they had covered nearly 30 miles, and Beatrice was exhausted but exhilarated by their escape. They made camp in a sheltered grove, taking turns keeping watch while the others slept. As the sun rose higher, Isaac studied the horizon with concern. "What is it?" Beatrice asked, noticing his expression. "Dust cloud, about 5 miles back. Could be nothing, but we should move on." They packed quickly and continued their journey, pushing the horses harder than before. By midday, it was clear they were being pursued. The dust cloud had grown larger, indicating multiple riders moving at speed. "Winters must have returned early," Isaac said grimly as they paused to water the horses. "Someone at the ranch would have told him we're gone." Beatrice felt fear rising in her throat. "What do we do?" "Change of plans. Laramie is still 2 days' ride from here, but there's a small settlement about 15 miles ahead, Silver Creek. The telegraph operator there is an honest man. If we can get word to Marshal Donovan in Laramie, he might be able to meet us halfway." They rode hard for Silver Creek, arriving as the sun was setting. The small town consisted of little more than a general store, a saloon, and a handful of buildings clustered around a dusty main street. Isaac led them directly to the telegraph office, which was attached to the general store. The operator, an elderly man with spectacles perched on his nose, listened gravely as Isaac explained their situation and dictated a message to Marshal Donovan. "I'll send it right away," he promised. "But you folks should find somewhere to lay low. Word is Winters and his men were through here not 2 hours ago, asking questions. They're ahead of us." Beatrice felt panic rising. "Circling back now, I'd wager. They know these parts well." Isaac thanked the man and led Beatrice back outside. "We need to find somewhere to hide until the marshal can get here." The operator's wife, a kind-faced woman named Mrs. Everett, offered them shelter in a small cabin behind their home. "My sister used to live there before she passed," she explained. "No one would think to look for you there." They gratefully accepted, settling into the humble dwelling as darkness fell completely. Mrs. Everett brought them a simple supper and fresh water for washing, then left them alone with a warning to keep the lamps low and voices quiet. In the small cabin, with danger pressing in from all sides, Beatrice and Isaac found themselves drawn to each other with an intensity neither could deny. Their kisses grew desperate, hands exploring with increasing boldness as they sought comfort in each other's arms. "Beatrice," Isaac whispered against her lips, "I want you more than I've ever wanted anything, but I won't dishonor you." She silenced him with another kiss. "There would be no dishonor in loving each other," she said softly. "Whatever happens tomorrow, tonight is ours." In the narrow bed, beneath a faded quilt, they discovered each other fully. Isaac's touches were gentle, reverent, so different from the rough handling Beatrice had endured from Winters on their wedding night. For the first time, she understood what it meant to truly join with another person, body and soul interconnected in an act of love rather than possession. Afterward, lying in Isaac's arms, Beatrice felt a peace she hadn't known in years. "Is this what you meant?" she asked, tracing patterns on his chest. "About teaching me what marriage should be?" Isaac kissed her forehead. "This is part of it. But real love goes deeper than physical desire. It's about seeing someone for who they truly are and choosing them every day. It's about building something together, supporting each other through hardship." He tightened his arms around her. "It's what I want with you, Beatrice. A real life, a real marriage." "I want that too," she whispered, tears pricking at her eyes. More than anything, they fell asleep holding each other, both aware that morning might bring either salvation or destruction. Dawn came too quickly. They were awakened by urgent knocking at the cabin door. Isaac reached for his gun as Beatrice clutched the sheet around herself, but it was only Mrs. Everett, her face drawn with worry. "Winters and his men are in town," she said without preamble. "They're searching every building. You need to go now." They dressed quickly and gathered their few belongings. Mrs. Everett led them out the back way to where their horses were stabled. "Head for the creek and follow it north," she instructed. "There's an old mining camp about 10 miles up. You might find shelter there until help arrives." They thanked her and mounted up, riding hard out of town as the first pink light of dawn touched the eastern sky. They had covered perhaps 5 miles when they heard hoofbeats behind them. "Ride!" Isaac shouted, and they urged their horses to greater speed. The creek trail narrowed as they rode north, winding through increasingly rocky terrain. Their pursuers were gaining ground, the sound of their approach growing louder. As they rounded a bend, Isaac suddenly pulled up short. Ahead of them, blocking the trail, were 3 of Winter's men, rifles raised. "Go back!" Isaac yelled, wheeling his horse around, but it was too late. Behind them, Winters and 2 more of his men appeared, cutting off their retreat. Well, Winters drawled, dismounting leisurely. "My faithless wife and my treacherous foreman. How convenient to find you both together." Isaac positioned his horse protectively in front of Beatrice's. "It's over, Winters. The federal marshal knows everything about the land fraud, about the murders, including Beatrice's father." Winters laughed. "Do you think I care? No marshal has jurisdiction out here. This is my territory." He drew his pistol. "Now, I'm going to kill you, Adams, and then I'm taking my wife home to teach her a lesson about loyalty." "No," Beatrice cried, spurring her horse forward. "I won't go back. I'd rather die." "That can be arranged," Winters snarled, raising his gun. What happened next occurred so quickly that Beatrice could barely follow the sequence of events. Isaac lunged from his horse, tackling Winters to the ground as gunfire erupted around them. She screamed as she saw Isaac take a bullet to the shoulder, but he kept fighting, wrestling with Winters for control of the pistol. More shots rang out, but these came from farther down the trail. Through the chaos, Beatrice saw new riders approaching, men wearing badges. The marshal had arrived. In the confusion, Winters broke free from Isaac and raised his gun again. Without thinking, Beatrice pulled the small derringer from her saddlebag, the gun her father had given her for protection, which she had kept hidden even from Winters, and fired. The shot caught Winters in the chest. He looked almost surprised as he stumbled backward, fell to his knees, and then collapsed face first into the dirt. The gunfire ceased abruptly. Winter's men, seeing their leader fall and faced with lawmen's weapons, quickly surrendered. Beatrice dismounted and ran to Isaac, who was pressing a hand to his bleeding shoulder. "Are you all right?" she asked frantically, helping him sit up. "I've been better," he managed with a weak smile. "But I'll live." A tall man with a marshal's badge approached them. "Isaac Adams. I got your telegraph. Seems we arrived just in time." "Marshal Donovan." Isaac nodded. "Thank you for coming." The marshal surveyed the scene, his gaze lingering on Winter's body. "Looks like you had things under control." He glanced at the small gun still clutched in Beatrice's hand. "That your work, madam?" Beatrice nodded, suddenly afraid. He was going to kill Isaac. "Self-defense, clear as day," the marshal said firmly. "And from what I've heard, that man had a lot to answer for." He helped Isaac to his feet. "Let's get you patched up, and then we can talk about those documents you mentioned." Over the next several weeks, the full extent of Harold Winter's crimes came to light. With Isaac's evidence and Beatrice's testimony, authorities were able to uncover a pattern of land theft, intimidation, and murder stretching back years. Many families who had been forced off their land were able to reclaim their property, including the deed to Beatrice's father's homestead. Isaac's wound healed slowly, but with Beatrice tending to him, he recovered his strength. They stayed in Laramie during the investigation, taking rooms at a respectable boarding house, separate rooms, to maintain propriety, though they spent most daylight hours together, planning their future. "I've been thinking," Isaac said one evening as they sat on the boarding house porch. "Your father's land, it's good land. With the right care, it could be a fine ranch." Beatrice nodded. It could. She had been contemplating returning there, though the thought of living where her father had died filled her with apprehension. "We could build something new there," Isaac continued. "Something that honors his memory but looks to the future." He took her hand. "Our future, if you'll have me." Beatrice smiled, tears gathering in her eyes. "Are you asking what I think you're asking, Isaac Adams?" He slid from the bench onto one knee, still holding her hand. "Beatrice Turner, I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? A real wife, in a real marriage built on love and respect." "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, with all my heart." They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony attended by Marshal Donovan and a few friends they had made in Laramie. As summer turned to fall, they returned to the Turner homestead. Though painful memories lingered, together they began the work of healing the land and themselves. They built a new house, a comfortable 2-story home with wide windows that caught the morning light. Isaac taught Beatrice to ride properly, and she showed him how to coax stubborn vegetables from the Wyoming soil. They worked side by side, equal partners in all things. Their first child, a daughter, was born the following spring. They named her Hope, for what she represented to both of them. As Beatrice watched Isaac cradle their infant daughter, singing softly to her as the sunset painted the plains in gold, she reflected on how far they had come. "What are you thinking about?" Isaac asked, noticing her gaze. "About that night in my garden, when you said you would teach me what marriage means." She moved to sit beside him, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I understand now." Isaac kissed her temple. "And what is it that you understand, Mrs. Adams?" "That love isn't about possession or control. It's about freedom, the freedom to be yourself and be loved for who you are." She looked up at him. "It's about building something together that's stronger than either of us alone." "That's right," he agreed, shifting Hope to one arm so he could wrap the other around Beatrice. "And we've only just begun." As twilight deepened into night, they sat together on the porch of their home, the vast Wyoming sky spreading endless possibilities above them. Where once Beatrice had felt trapped, she now saw only open horizons and a future bright with promise in the arms of the man who had truly taught her what love means.